We're with retired Lieutenant Colonel Glen Grant. He's an international security and defense advisor. He was working as a defense attaché in Finland and Estonia, and then Latvia and Lithuania asked him to help them with their successful NATO applications. It's been a year since we've spoken with Glenn. Back then, what did we talk about? What war was really like? We learned a lot about armored personnel carriers, what tanks are, how to define what NATO Article 5 is. And today we're going to talk a little bit about geopolitics. Glenn, you've worked closely with Ukraine's defense parliamentary defense committee, and you've advised Ukrainian officers, NGOs, and defense volunteers. We're going to cover some of that today too. Isn't this just a proxy war for America, what's going on in Ukraine?
No, it's not a proxy war for anybody. This is a straightforward land grab and genocidal attempt by Russia to take over Ukraine, because Russia on its own cannot be a world power. It's as simple as that. Russia on its own, Russia needs what Ukraine has got. Firstly, I mean, its resources, its people, its engineering, its cleverness, its minerals, its ports, you name it, they need those things. Also, you might call it living room of moving closer to NATO and closer to the European Union. But fundamentally, Russia needs Ukraine, because without it, Putin cannot claim to be the real leader of everything. He needs to take Ukraine because he's been talking about it for so long as being the fundamental part of Russia, that if he now does not take Ukraine, he's shown to be a lesser person. He's not the Tsar of history. He's not the Stalin of history.
You saw that I just reached back. You're familiar with Tim Marshall's Prisoners of Geography. This was written before the 2022 full-scale invasion. Yeah. He talked about how important the port, the Black Sea port was. But you've mentioned things that it sounds like Russia has. You know, they have people. They have potential.
No, they don't. No, they don't. They don't. They have alcoholics. They have alcoholics. They don't have engineers in the same way. Most of their good people have left. They've left Russia. They are in America. They're in Cyprus. They're in everywhere else. The real brains, half the brains of Russia, not all, but half the brains of Russia have got up and left.
Okay, but isn't that a strategic idea? And you've blown my questions because I was going to be disciplined, but now I've got to jump in here. You know, the Afghan Soviet War, you're familiar with history.
Yeah, very.
15,000 soldiers died. And it was that war being protested that is accredited to the Soviet Union breaking down. Those protests are what kicked it off. Now we have a situation where over 300,000 casualties, Russian casualties, have happened. Nobody's protesting.
Because you're in, for start, that was a different time. That was a different time.
But that's my point.
You could not claim as a Tsar. You couldn't claim as a Tsar to be taking Afghanistan for Russia. It's not part of the system. They're not fraternal brothers. So you know that was an invasion of another country. For Russia, going to Ukraine is not invasion of another country. They see Ukraine as being Russia, a part of Russia that is breaking away, a part of Russia that's becoming evil West, a part of Russia that is, you know, getting homosexuals, for goodness sakes, and people who are transgender and transgender toilets, and they're becoming lovers of NATO and everything else, and lovers of the European Union. So this is a completely different mindset. This is to do with greater Russia. Therefore, the population wants this to happen. The majority of the population is supporting Putin in this because they believe that Nazis have taken over a part of Russia and have to be driven out. And this is the mindset. You need just look at the YouTube videos where they go and they interview, you know, Mrs. whatever her name is in some town in Russia. No, she's against this evil. The Nazis have taken over Ukraine. The Nazis have to be killed and driven out. And if we have to kill all of them, we will do. This is the mindset. Greater Russia. This is greater Russia. Afghanistan was not Greater Russia. Afghanistan was an invasion of another country.
But my argument is they've learned in the past 200 years, they being the Kremlin, who's ever in power. Go back to January 2022, and BBC did a show in Kyiv, and Carl Bildt was there. And he had said basically, Russian foreign policy hasn't changed in the past 200 years. So what you say about
Correct, it hasn't. This is not foreign policy. This is internal. This is not foreign policy at all. Ukraine is not foreign policy. Ukraine is part of Russia as far as they are concerned. This is internal, not external. Foreign policy hasn't changed. But to have the foreign policy, they need Ukraine.
why will they stop at Ukraine?
They
We've
won't.
talked.
They won't.
Okay.
They won't.
So
They
different
won't stop at Ukraine.
different think tanks have been talking about the risk of Russia attacking NATO countries. Do you consider this a realistic scenario?
Yes. Once they've gone past Ukraine, they will continue doing something else. There may be a 7-year, 8-year, 9-year, 10-year gap. Remember, we were 2008 with Georgia through till, but you know, Georgia, Armenia are both ripe for takeover. Moldova will then go, but all the places that are non-NATO will go first. So look out some of the central Asian states. This is Russia is going to keep going as long as Putin is in charge, or one of his acolytes with the same brain is in charge. Russia is going to keep this. It's on a holy war.
So
and if you're on a holy war, you don't stop.
All right. So if Ukraine is considered Russian domestic policy, Ukraine is also playing a huge role in American domestic policy. Do you think Biden is holding back military support so just before his election in November 2024, he can come out like a big winner? Do you think?
Let's look at the facts. He is holding back support. Okay, there's enough shit in the desert that you could arm the Ukrainian army 3 times over, lose it all, and put more there. Okay, they've got guns, they've got M1 tank, they've got the lot, M1 Bradleys, sorry, they've got the lot in the desert. They've got A-10 aircraft. They're just about to take out of service. So there's lots and lots of stuff that they could actually give Ukraine that would make a fundamental difference. That's the first. That's a fact. Okay, now what isn't a fact and what isn't clear is the reason why. And the reason why it may be elections. It may be elections. It may also be that someone in the White House, including Biden himself, is bought. Okay, it could, we don't know this, but they are delaying. The White House is delaying. It could well be just straightforward fear that Russia actually means what it says about going nuclear. Now, maybe Biden has got intelligence that we don't know about, that he's holding back on something that makes him make a different decision. The fact of the matter is we don't know. We only know the fact that he is delaying. That's the only thing we know. The rest of it is conjecture. And I don't know which, but I worry that it may be that him or some of his team are bought. And if before anybody says that that's nonsense, hey, it's not. Look at the whole of Europe. We know that politicians all across Europe have been bought. It's a rare country where they haven't, or where someone is not trying to undermine the support for Ukraine. A rare country. And increasingly we're seeing more countries, more politicians coming out on the pro side, which means that the FSB has been doing its work a lot better than we even dared dream about.
Well, they've been doing it longer too. I mean,
longer than we did dream. Yeah, I mean, we now know that this has been going on from back in the 90s. I knew that anyway, because the defense attaché in Finland told me. The Russian defense attaché. So it's that's one of the reasons why I've been so positive about knowing what was going to happen, was because I was told in black and white terms that this was coming.
Okay, let's create a little bit of context. January 15th, that was the day that US military aid was all used up. Since November, there hasn't been a lot coming out of the EU. Germany and the UK have increased their commitments, but
Yeah,
you start looking around at other potential donors, you realize that if you look at the G7, there's some real inconsistencies there.
there are.
France and Italy have committed less than Lithuania, for example, like
Yeah.
600 million, 650 million respectively. Um, what do you say to this? Why are these allies not being called out?
Well, we don't know that they're not. That's the first thing in private, and I suspect that actually they are. The second thing is that a lot of the stuff that's coming in comes in at different rates. So when you say January 15, the aid was dried up, yes, but that's in America. There are a whole load of things that are in the train that are en route that are still coming in, even if they're bleeding in at different times. So the decision, when you talk about a Ramstein decision and they say, yes, it's not coming tomorrow, some of that stuff is 8 months, 7 months, 6 months, 3 months, doesn't matter. Each individual item takes depends upon the time, the transportation rates, the arrangement rates, and everything else. So there is still stuff coming in, even if someone says that, we haven't got any money now. Now, that money is the spending time, not the arrival time for money that was previously spent. So that needs to be understood. Now, going back to your political bit about countries like Italy and France, well, yeah, I mean, I've written about it several times that the southern area, France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece, they're not delivering enough. I mean, Greece has got masses of equipment, but of course it's frightened of Turkey. Now, America has the capacity to put pressure on these people because of all the things that America does with them and how it supports them in various ways. So it's a pity that it has not come, but maybe more will come from them in the future, because this is a long game. And therefore some of the countries will be wanting to see they'll be wanting to see that they get replacement equipment before they actually hand over some of their older equipment, before they actually give things. But the bottom line is some countries have divvied up as much as they possibly can do. Some, like Estonia, have basically formalized it in law and will give basically a large chunk of their defense system. Some countries like Finland are probably still digging into the rocks to find what they've got there from 20 years ago that's available and useful, and they have got stuff. And there are others like Sweden that really hasn't got very much at all, because they cut their defense to the bone, like Germany cut its defense pretty much to the bone.
Is there a shift happening in Sweden, like is happening with the new?
Oh yeah. Sweden knows which side it's on for probably the first time since the Second World War. And their chief of defense and their politicians are really getting their act together. And we need them to, because it's a capable country. and whatever they support us with is going to be good things in future, especially in terms of things like electronic warfare, where they have got that sort of brain and companies that can deliver stuff.
When we're talking about military aid, there's always one excuse that's always used, whether in the United States, political factions in Europe, it's about Ukraine, transparency, and corruption. The leadership of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry is really trying to crack down, but how is Ukraine going to come away from this image of being corrupt?
It will do. It will do. I mean, I think that people don't understand that, anything that was part of the Soviet Union was corrupt. Completely. I mean, not just a little bit, but completely, as Russia is corrupt, completely, and still is. And of course, Ukraine was part of Russia, effectively, part of the Soviet Union. And so for years and years and years. And so the corruption ran absolutely deep inside inside Ukraine. And you're probably looking, out of the 30 million, at least 10% were part of that corruption. It was how they existed. I mean, you did not exist without corruption. So corruption, nepotism, and having to pay for things under the table, those were normal, and it used to be the case in places like Latvia and Lithuania and other countries. It was similar when the wall came down, and in some countries in Eastern Europe there are still problems with this. It is part of it's part of the nature of the beast that corruption takes a long time to take away. And I know you're saying people are trying to crack down on corruption. Well, the answer is they're not as hard as they should be.
You think Ukraine could do better?
Oh yeah, a lot more, a lot better, a lot better. For example, the government could listen to the anti-corruption people. It doesn't. It actually tries to put anti-corruption journalists and anti-corruption people in prison. So it's not. There is because they're criticizing the government. Well, it's very easy. Get rid of the criticism. Just listen to them and fix it. But they don't want to do that for some reason, whether that reason is because they're on the take themselves, or whether that reason is just because they're too proud to admit that a journalist up the street has got a better story than they have. I don't know. But the fact is the government could do lots more than it's doing at the moment.
Okay, you've talked about the nature of the beast. Post-Soviet regions, corruption was one of them. And you also talked about people being bought off. Compromat is also a typical thing.
Yeah.
Is Putin playing the waiting game because he's hoping that Trump's going to get elected and that'll change everything for him?
Oh, almost certainly playing. No, but I don't think he's playing the waiting game for Trump. I think he's playing the waiting game for. I mean, Trump is merely a cog in the wheel. There are lots of other cogs in that wheel. Maybe they're not as big a cogs as a cog as Trump, but what he's waiting for is for the West to fall apart. He's waiting for the European Union to fall apart. And if you look at it, then you could say that he's doing quite well, isn't he? With Hungary, with Slovakia, with Switzerland, with Austria, all playing on his side. The United Arab Emirates allowing stuff to go through to Russia. And he's got Northern Korea. He's got China. Sometimes he's got India, doing things for oil. So you look at it from his perspective, and he's actually doing quite well, thank you, because the people dying don't matter. People are ammunition. You just collect them from the public and you throw them at the front. They are not people. Don't forget that. He does not see people. He's FSB. People are not people. They are ammunition. He is power. The rest of them are there to be used for his plans for Greater Russia and his greatness as the Tsar. So don't get any daft ideas about the people bit. Everything else, if you look at it externally, he's not doing badly. South Africa, has just gone in against Israel. Now, he's laughing in this respect. For him, things are positive. For him, things are positive, and they're moving positively. The front line seems to be now slightly being pushed back and positively in his direction. He looks at all these things and he says, hey, we just keep going the way we're going.
But isn't there a little bit of a incorrect narrative right now in media in general? I mean, Russia has shifted to a wartime economy. They're losing thousands of pieces of kit. They've lost so many soldiers. They're using things from the 1950s, but it's still always talked about that Russia has regained momentum or is doing well in its war on Ukraine. Do you think that's a fair assessment? I mean, you've just listed off the allies.
Yes, I mean, they're losing overall, but you have to look at it from their viewpoint. That they see this in a different perspective, because the big prize is not the battle in Ukraine. You just have to keep the battle in Ukraine going. The big prize is breaking up Western support, is breaking up the European Union so that things don't come from the European Union. It's separating Great Britain from Germany and France. It's what we talked about. It's France and Italy and people not giving as much. That's the prize, and so the narrative is, they're missing the point in the narrative that Putin is playing a much wider and longer game than we are. We're all looking at the battle. We're all looking at the fighting. or let's just say the press are looking at the fighting there. You don't ever see anything about, you know, the scoundrels in Austria. No, you hear about the ski resorts. You don't hear anything about the scoundrels in Switzerland. You hear about the ski resorts because they're not looking at Austria and Switzerland as being part of the other side, which at the moment they are. They are. They're on the Hitler side. Hitler side.
Okay, let's offer some context. I know that Austria still gets over 50% of its natural gas from Russia. They've claimed that they can't update their systems to change that. What's Switzerland doing? You're talking about the financial aspects, aren't you?
Just the money. They've got Russian money, which they're not handing over, and they're allowing companies to actually to put things through into Russia via Switzerland.
Okay.
Mine, so is France. So is Britain, so is America. So we still haven't grasped the totality of this problem yet.
So the goal is to force people to act unilaterally because smaller units can be conquered easier. They want to break down international coalitions. They want to destroy the EU. They want to weaken other alliances. And they're doing this at a pretty high cost, though. How long can they really sustain these rates of attrition?
Well, they're not. It's not high cost. It's not high cost. FSB soldiers inside Austria bribing people, or in another country putting money, you know, his oligarchs slipping money into someone's pocket, offering them a job in Gazprom, like that lady from Austria. That's not high cost. That's cheap. That's cheapo.
So the Kremlin's not worried about human loss. It's really going to be a financial aspect. Are they going to run out of money at some point? I mean, they're out of the SWIFT banking system.
Good question. We haven't actually damaged the system to the point where they are, but do they need money? Maybe, but I mean, you know, they're offering lots of money to these to soldiers on the front line to go to the front line, and the soldiers the people are coming in because it's so much money. Now the question is, and of course then they're dying and they don't get the money anyway. Now that's a very good question of whether they will break down first and the system will collapse. My feeling always is that it's only ever one day away from collapse. In other words, it could just fold overnight. It's like their front line could just fold overnight, because you know suddenly lots of people suddenly say, why are we doing this? And this does happen. It does happen in countries, but there is a stubbornness about it at the moment that is worrying. And don't forget that they still have, I would suspect, quite a lot of money stacked away in Switzerland, quite a lot of money. I mean, 3 or 4 of his oligarchs have actually increased their wealth. Yeah. So you know, they've increased their wealth. So he's still got oligarchs he can tap for money, and you know, with relationships, with promises of this, with promises of owning Gazprom afterwards, and things like this. So I would. I would say, you know, we should be wary of thinking that he's going to break down in a hurry.
What would a Russian victory really mean for Ukraine and the rest of the world? What would that look like?
Well, the first thing is that Ukraine will be immediately turned into part of the Russian war effort, and soldiers will be given very clear ideas. If you don't fight for us, you die, and they will, you know, kill a few leaders and things like this. The leadership would be killed, and Russia would take over the country in the same way that it would take over any other place. Maybe not all, maybe only a large chunk of Ukraine, but enough to neuter, enough to take the resources that are in that part, because a large amount of the resources are still on the other side of Dnieper. They're not on the western side; they're on the eastern side. So, you know, remember, all the wheat is on the eastern side. So, you know, having done that, he's then got the capacity then to start blackmailing other people, especially with terms of wheat, because if he gets wheat, he's going to have, I saw some figure, something like 12% of the world's wheat, which is enough to actually to dominate the markets. So that's the first thing. I mean, the second thing is that then immediately there is extreme vulnerability for whoever he decides to go to next, whether that's Finland, whether that's Norway through the top, whether that's So you could watch something like Svalbard disappear very quickly into Russian territory. You will see Georgia disappear very quickly into Russian territory. He's not going to stop. He may, as I say, he may take a break and actually rearm. But the West hasn't done anything when the war is going on. So do we think that they would do any rearming? I don't. I just don't see it. I don't see that the understanding by our politicians that we are actually at war today, and that this war is the most cleverly fought on the Russian side of any war that anybody's been fighting for forever.
I'm in Germany and I see a huge resistance to the acknowledgement that the hybrid warfare is even taking place. Even
Yeah.
though there's evidence of this in political movements, protests, who's at protests, who's paying for protests, what kind of ideas. How do you convince a country that they've been infiltrated?
Only by high-level politicians speaking out. And speaking out firmly and strongly, and going on television, on the news, and saying, people, you have to understand that we have an enemy within. But they don't want to believe it themselves. I think, they don't want to believe that someone that they've known for 10 years has actually been bought. Someone they think is a friend. There are lots of people that have been bought.
But is it as people think being bought is, where you're handed cash? Isn't it usually favors or influence?
It's everything. It's whatever the weakness is of the person, whether that weakness is, whether that weakness is money, whether that weakness is sex, whether that weakness is power, influence. It doesn't matter. They'll try and pin down what each person is, his weaknesses, and then they'll work on that. They'll work on it, and you can see it once you know what you're looking for. It's a lot easier to see it. I mean, at least none of us dance with Putin at our wedding.
Okay. You just mentioned Austria again. I was surprised at how hard you were coming after Switzerland too. Are you surprised that just recently Zelensky announced with Switzerland that he was going to organize peace talks, maybe in Geneva?
No, I mean, Zelensky will go anywhere for peace talks. Anywhere that's got a good name. But I mean, those are not peace talks, of course. All they are is a chance for Zelensky to actually to say his part. There's no peace talks going on anywhere. Haven't been since the war started, and there will not be any peace talks until Russia is defeated. They are just discussions. They're public discussions. There may be you could say good PR on the side of Zelensky. Russia has got to be beaten before any peace is possible.
You make it almost sound like Zelensky's just workshopping world leaders to let them feel like they're contributing to the solution.
I think to a degree is. And to another degree, it's engagement. It's engagement to remind them that we're still fighting, that we're still doing stuff, and it's necessary engagement. I mean, it's what Churchill did. I mean, he actually did some pretty serious flying through battle areas to actually to talk to people. It's an important part of the leadership role, is to keep engagement with these people, and maybe something turns and they support you a bit better out of guilt, but yeah, he needs to keep doing it.
Do you think he's still got his magic? I know people were always leveraging off his popularity, and Sunak showed up just lately. There's just a constant, it's a revolving door of world leaders showing up in Kyiv. Has it become less in your opinion, or is it still as meaningful?
It's pretty meaningful for the people in Ukraine. It's still important, although nobody has touched the spark of Boris going there.
I was going to ask you about Boris Johnson. There's rumors that he's going to keep showing up.
Nobody has even touched. I mean, that first walk through the Maidan in his suit, when everybody else is in helmets and uniform and everything else, that was magic, and that was a piece of leadership unparalleled in the last 50 years from anybody. I mean, it was statesman-like, as opposed to, now he may have made a complete mess, a complete balls up of being prime minister in Britain, but this one act, that was remarkable. and people still talk about it a lot. And even this week, I've had at least 3 emails, not emails, sorry, the 3 messages of people asking me, do you think Boris would come and be our prime minister? And there's a serious. These are from people that are serious. These are not from, Mrs. Smith down the road. They actually, want someone to come and actually organize government for Ukraine, because the present prime minister is a. I think the best way of putting it is a lost cause. I mean, he's hidden away, and you don't see anything from him of any substance or shape. And that's a shame, because at the moment they need a strong prime minister to balance out the president, not a weak person. So Boris did something remarkable. People are pleased when Biden came, but it didn't have the same charisma. Didn't have the same charisma. And Sunak did a lot this week, and it highlighted the fact that Britain is digging in for this one. Even if we have actually got a pretty weak armed forces at the moment.
When we're talking about armed forces, I've got to ask you about the spring offensive, summer offensive, fall offensive, counteroffensive. Was it more successful than everyone thought? What kind of metrics are being used to judge success? And I'm mentioning that because what's happened in the Black Sea and how Ukraine, without a navy and without really heavy air support, has been able to drive the Russian Navy pretty much out of the Black Sea. However, the media seems to really be focusing on moving lines on a map by Bakhmut. So was the counteroffensive more successful than we thought?
That's a very good question. In my view, possibly not. I think it was doomed from the start, to be honest. Doomed because what the Americans were trying to get Ukraine to do was something they couldn't do. And they couldn't do it simply because the people were not trained sufficiently well.
Okay, got to help me out here. I'm not a military person.
Well, okay, you take people to Britain, they have 10 weeks training, okay, to do an operation. So 10 weeks, they are leaving primary school. Okay, a counteroffensive is a PhD operation. That's it in itself. You've got to go through that many years of work and understanding. Your generals have got to have that many years of understanding. Your colonels, your lieutenant colonels, everybody's got to be on the same page of doctrine and of training, and they've got to be at a high level to do this. 10 weeks or 20 weeks in Britain, it doesn't even scratch the surface of training required to do something like this. So the troops that were put in were just simply not sufficiently prepared in any way, shape, or form to undertake this operation.
Okay, I'm going to fight you here. I know that you were in Ukraine advising on interoperability. You were working with the military. Your advice was, if you want to get into NATO, you have to act like you're in NATO. And they had been acting like they were in NATO for what, at least 10 years?
No. Oh, yeah, at the top, talking like they're in NATO, not acting like they're in NATO.
Okay. Let's take this a step further then. They want to get into NATO.
Yeah.
The top is talking like they're in NATO. And maybe the counteroffensive wasn't as successful because the things NATO does are usually with air coverage. Were they?
This is a nonsense.
Okay, help me out.
Okay, they didn't have air cover, but what you have to remember is that there are no NATO tactics. There are only tactics. Okay, tactics is the ability to, in an area, to beat the enemy. That's it. Now, whether you go in from one side, whether you go in from another side, whether you go in straight, you have to choose the best route. So there are no NATO tactics. So a choice of what to do. If you haven't got air cover, and the other side has got more drones than you, then you do not attack. You don't do it. You just don't do it because you're going to die. Or you have to work out how you can do it like at night if the enemy hasn't got very many drones with infrared. And you have to learn that. So you have to have intelligence on what you're going to do. Then you have to choose where you're going to attack. Now, if you choose to go into attack in the place that is the strongest defended, then that does not make any sense to anybody. Now, if people want to blame that on NATO, and say, you know, Americans do that, then I'm sorry, that shows a weakness of the commander on the ground, because the commanders on the ground, the general, should have said, no, there is no way we can do this. Not in this way, not in this fashion. They shouldn't have even started. So, you know, you can't blame that on NATO. The decision for where to attack and when to attack is a Ukrainian decision. And that Ukrainian decision, and even when they did attack, they did not attack in force. And that is not NATO, that's doctrinal for any war anywhere. Concentration of force is a principle of war. If you want to break through, you have to concentrate force. And Ukraine did not do that. It actually went in force weak, even without air cover. Air cover is, you know, air cover is just one of the arguments. But if you haven't got air cover, you don't attack there like that.
So what explains these decisions? Is this going back to not having the PhD in war?
Yeah, one big thing is not having the level or being, I don't know, maybe being frightened by the American advisors who gave advice that whatever advice they gave, whether it was followed or not followed, I don't know. I mean, they might have said, do this and it'll work, because none of us know what advice was given to them. But you know, but it's clear that the principles of war were not followed. That's a fact. And that's a Ukrainian problem. That is not an American or NATO problem. You can't blame that on NATO. NATO can only give advice. America can only give advice. But anybody in their right mind that wants to do a counterattack with troops with minimal training, where the leadership has had very little time to actually learn how to work with the troops, 10 weeks is nothing. It's just nothing. You know, you want a year's worth of rehearsals before you do something like this. And even then, you're still going to be struggling in some areas, like logistics.
Take that same argument you just used about Ukraine and turn it around to Russia. And some of their very high-ranking military, I think an admiral and generals have been killed in this war.
Lots.
Their leadership is dying. How are they?
No, their old leadership is dying. The previous, don't forget that the previous leadership in Russia were all the old corrupt people who were not there because of their competence. They were there because of their loyalty and their ability to spin money out to people who were demanding the money from them. So they were not trained high quality generals, with some exceptions. Those exceptions being those technical areas like the artillery and electronic warfare, where you can't go anywhere without having a degree of brain. But of course, and you've got brains to come in, because otherwise it doesn't work at all. But the infantry and the bog standard soldiers, you don't need they don't think you need brains for that, because their doctrine has been, you get in the vehicle, you drive and you fight and you die. And then the next one comes and drives a bit faster and drives harder and dies, which is what they're doing in the battle now. But what they're getting now is more intelligent people coming into some of those jobs, because you know, some of those now in the war are not the old corrupt army people. They're slightly newer. They're slightly, you know, you've got people coming in from business. You've got people, younger, brighter ones who have not yet been soured off by corruption, the corruption of the army over years. I mean, most of the senior generals in Russia were the level of a good senior sergeant in America. Why are they there? Because of loyalty. Loyalty. Number one principle, loyalty. Ability to find money for the boss so he can buy a bigger house. You know, look at all those generals. Go and see where they lived. See whether you can find one who lives in a little flat. Not many, I can tell you.
How often do you find that people reporting on Ukraine have no idea about military stuff?
About 95%. 95%. And there are some who are very, I mean, I have one French journalist who really digs and digs and digs and digs, and he'll ring me, then he'll ring me back again to because he's asked someone else and someone else has said something different. For starters, you have to understand the culture. Now, don't say that I understand the culture completely, because there are depths to this culture that are almost impossible. And I was talking to someone last night in Ukraine in the system, and he was again trying to educate me on some of the things of why do they not do this, and and his answer was, well, because that man knows what's going on and he's the one who'll find the money, and if you get rid of him, the next one coming in may not be loyal and may not do what you want. He may be working for someone else. So there's all these complexities, cultural history that no Western European can really grasp the depths of this. You can only just keep working at it, asking, thinking, talking, and trying to look at, to understand how these things go on. And it's the same with Russia. I mean, I started studying the Russian military mid-70s. So, I've had plenty of time to look at it and to think about it. I mean, there are certain rules with these things. One rule, which is, it is not a lie to tell someone what they want to hear. Remember that. It's not a lie. It's culturally correct to tell someone what they want to hear. So when generals come and visit, and they get told what they want to hear, and they go away happy. And they haven't been lied to. It's not a lie. It's a cultural more that actually has to be done. So that's one thing. So you could take this. I mean, even let's just take criticism. Okay, so you come and someone says everything's going well. Well, that doesn't mean everything's going well. It means it's not going well at all. So until you're told that it's nonsense and it doesn't work, you're not trusted. You're being told the other story, which is everything's okay. We're doing this, we're doing that. We're doing NATO this and NATO that. That is because that's not a lie. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the second thing is that in Ukraine is that nothing in Ukraine is as it seems. And when you think you've actually understood the subject, you are actually not understanding it at all. And there's another 2 or 3 or 4 levels underneath this of complexity, of human interaction, of things that you didn't know, of historic pathways that lead into today that you don't know about, and you possibly will never find out about, never know about, and only the people themselves know about those pathways. So you take what they say and you take what is going on, and I found that the most simple thing to do is to ignore most of that, and ignore it totally, and only look at results. In other words, actually what is happening. So when someone says we're going to do a million drones, how many are being produced? Exactly how many are being produced? Answer, ask the units, how many have you been given? So if they say, well, we're getting 1 a week, you can multiply that by the number of units and work out how many drones have been produced. And so you have to go to the data all the time and trust the data, trust the money, where the money is being spent. And that tells you exactly what is really happening, not what people are saying. So you've got to go to the data. And that big part of my activity and my research is data mining. What is actually happening somewhere in A, B, and C? Not what people are saying is happening, but what is actually happening.
You know that there's a Ukrainian Foreign Legion. A lot of people signed up for it. Some of them sold their skills they didn't have. Other people came in thinking it would be some kind of adventure. Now on TikTok, there is someone that was active in the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, and it's been reported that taken information that jeopardizes them. Now, the US has no extradition with Ukraine. This guy's American. Obviously, what he did is against operational security, OPSEC, and it's got a lot of people in Ukraine mad if it is indeed true. Is this another danger of being a soldier nowadays? This additional risk of someone doxing your barracks, where you're located, all of these things. How is this being handled in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, things like physical infrastructure, you can't dox. Everybody knows where they are. They're on the maps. Google Maps has done this for you. I mean, so things like that. So what you're talking about is capacity of actual fighting capacity of things.
Okay.
And that you want to keep, you want to keep relatively quiet, unless that there is a unless there is a complete mismatch between what government and the senior military leadership are saying and actually what is happening on the ground, because then it's quite clear that the honesty train is broken, and the only way then to make sure that the boys on the ground have a voice. And I read a wonderful thing on Facebook this week where someone was actually analysing that the soldiers on the front line have fewer rights than prisoners in the Ukrainian prisons, and fewer rights than the Russian prisoners of war. So that is an important sort of thing that needs to be understood by people, because when they talk about, for example, why people are not being recruited, these are some of the fundamental reasons why they're not being recruited. Now, Foreign Legion, go back to the Foreign Legion. I mean, when the war started, you had a complete mishmash of people. I mean, loads of people came to the front line, including, Japanese and people from Peru and places, and actually joined up and fought. A lot of them packed up and left very quickly when they realized that this was not the war that they were thinking it was going to be, and actually it was bloody and nasty. A lot left because they could not deal with the low quality of the leadership that was actually dealing with them, because they were much better trained, for example, than some of the officers, many of the officers that were actually leading them. So they packed up and left. Now, the honest ones, in many cases, have come back and are actually working, training people. A large shout out to my Finnish colleagues who are actually back in training areas, actually helping, and would do more if the Ministry of Defence could get its act together and do some proper requests and proper asks of, can you send these boys back to help? So there are a lot of extremely honest Foreign Legion guys working all over in the defence forces. Some of them not Foreign Legion, by the way. Some of them are working just as volunteers. And a lot of them work as volunteers because if they go into the military system, they are then abused in some cases in their fighting. Others have stayed, and they're in units, the better units, where they are highly appreciated and they do an extremely good job. And I have to again shout out for people like the Finns and the and American Marine Corps soldiers who've come in.
Wait a minute, come on. But you're saying this, and of course someone's going to jump in and say, I told you NATO's fighting in Ukraine. I told you.
No, it's not NATO. These are volunteers.
How do you differentiate to someone?
If you're a
Are these
private
guys
soldier,
like on vacation or what?
yes. No, they're not on vacation. They've left the army. They're old. In many cases, they're 50.
Shout out to the old Finns.
They're 50
Okay, yeah.
years of age in a lot of cases. They've left. They've done their career. 10 years later, they've packed up their job in. I mean, I have one friend who works. He works as a post person in America, and he does 3 weeks to 4 weeks of post person to earn money. Then he comes back and fights for 2 to 3 weeks. Then he goes back and he's a post person for 2 to 3 weeks. I've got another one who works in an engineering factory, and he's an engineering man for about a month. And then he comes back and fights for a month, and then he goes back and he does engineering. Now these people are, they're not NATO. They've got as much NATO in them as a cat or a dog has. They are just normal, good human beings fighting for something they believe is right. But anyway, it doesn't even matter even if they were NATO, because Russia has been told that NATO's fighting. All the Russians believe NATO's fighting. So you're not ever going to convince Mrs. Smith in, Novosibirsk or some town in the far side of Siberia that NATO isn't fighting, because they all already believe they've been told it on television every day since 2014. There's a lot of extremely wonderful people out there who are actually risking their lives daily and dying for Ukraine. And so NATO bit is just a red herring.
Let's talk a little bit more about the volunteers then, the Ukrainian ones. There are about 900,000 people in Ukrainians armed forces.
Yeah.
And about 40,000 of them are women. And the
Yeah.
military is asking for another 500,000, 500,000 recruits. They want to implement a rotation, give some people a break, but people are hesitant, and it's unclear how these conscripts are going to be used in the future. What are your thoughts on this?
My first thought is the government is a year late in thinking about this. And that's because they're all the way through, they've been lying to the public and saying, you know, the war's going to be over by Christmas, sort of thing. And there is now a harsh, stark realization that the war isn't going to be over by Christmas. And that actually the number of volunteers going into the army has dropped. Now, you know, it's a treble problem. Three things. The first one is that just the delay is now creating something that is crisis. So that's the first problem, and it is crisis, and they haven't thought about the crisis. So the wording, the messaging is absolutely dreadful. The second one is that, you know, asking for 500,000. Now, don't ask me who actually asked for that in the first place, but it's become a standard thing that's being asked for. I mean, Zaluzhny, the chief of defense, said, I didn't ask for that like that. The problem is when you ask for 500,000, you're asking for numbers. And this is absolutely contrary to Cossack culture. Cossacks are not just going to go for 500,000. So you actually have got to you've got to follow the rules for these things, where you've got to have a home, a purpose, a cause. You've got to be looked after properly. You've got to know what you're going to do. And if you just ask for 500,000, what are you going to be? Meat? Are you just going to go and die in Bakhmut? They don't. This is not culturally the thing that makes people do things. Frankly, in any country, really. I mean, you know, okay, we did it in the First World War. You know, Britain needs you, sort of thing. Your country needs you. Sorry, but you know, people need to know that they're going to be utilized properly. If they're IT, if they're skilled engineer. I've got an engineer friend who's working, and he's been picking up cigarette ends the last week. He's an engineer. He's conscripted. He's an engineer. That is not how you make people work. And what they forget is that, you know, whenever someone is badly used, that your average person has got an extended family of about 60 people on average, which means that 60 people have been told it's shit and I'm not being looked after. So you've immediately reduced by a factor of 60 the chances of getting people to come in as volunteers. So there's all these things that are wrong. So they haven't actually got a system. I mean, there is no testing people when they come in to see whether they could be capable drone pilots, which of course some of the younger guys who've been playing on IT would be flipping awesome. But you know, what do they do with them? They're just a number. And until you actually get out of that, and that this is the Soviet heritage, until you get out of the Soviet heritage, asking for people to come and fight for you is extremely difficult.
So, to the best of your knowledge, there is no system to really use the resources people have and their knowledge and skills effectively right now with the recruits.
Yeah, no, there is no system. There is no system. Now, what's happening is that individual units, some of them very cleverly, are now asking for people to come and join them. And then there are websites now springing up with actual units and jobs where they're requesting people to come and do those jobs. But if you're not one of those, nobody sort of tests you and checks what you're going to do. You will just be very quickly through the training system, which may be in UK or somewhere else, or it may be in the training area in Ukraine, and then you're on the front line. And I would just say on the front line, long before you're ready to actually to fight properly on the front line. And why is this? Well, because they've delayed everything. They've delayed because the war was going to be over by Christmas. No, we're not in Crimea by Christmas, so we could be in Odessa by Christmas. So you know, these things actually mean that people have not realized that this crisis was coming, and now suddenly, it's a crisis, and nobody is properly prepared for it because they haven't been thinking about it, because they haven't planned how to do this properly. This is the reality of war. and it's the reality of the post-Soviet system that the large amount of the public are now trying to fight and to beat in Ukraine, to get it to come round to being Western and more Westernized and more thinking and more understanding. But it's a conflict in many ways. It's a conflict because, you know, you have one side that the senior military leadership are still, unfortunately, of a type, and now into the army are coming lots and lots and lots and lots of people from business, you know, from other experiences. I mean, my friend is a drone operator in one of the brigades, and he's actually a very serious human rights lawyer. So he's gone from human rights lawyer to drone operator. And I think he's actually probably quite good at it because he's highly intelligent. But you know, this is that there has to be a change in Ukraine. There has to be. But it's been very slow in coming. It's been very slow because there are a lot of people in Ukraine who don't even understand their own culture. So they don't understand all those things that have happened to them because they are in it. You know, you could almost say that it's like religion. You know, you're asking someone to go from one religion to another religion because, you know, in the Soviet days, how people acted, corruption and everything, that was religion. That's how it had that force within the country. And when you've got that force, it's not easy to change. It's not easy to change people. It's not easy to change thinking. And how people see things based upon religion and heavily with emotion, heavy with personal emotion about what is right and what is wrong, it becomes extremely difficult to change them to something else. It's very easy to blame NATO. It's very easy to blame European Union or someone else like that. When in effect, your whole world is being put upside down, A, because people are asking you to think differently, and B, because you're being attacked by Russia, who only a year, 2, 3, 4 years ago were your fraternal brothers. And many people in the country have still got relatives in Russia.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's very hard for this change to take place. And it is taking place. It is taking place. And it's bit by bit. It's not fast movement. And it's not going to be fast movement. I suspect it's going to be another couple of years before some of the major changes take place. And so this is a battle about, you know, whether Ukraine can actually reform itself before Russia actually manages to do something nasty.
Tell me, what are the key takeaways? What lessons are being learned now that are ready for the next war?
I mean, the first lesson is that warfare is still as bloody and nasty as it ever was. The second lesson is that logistics is what actually drives things, and that the turnover in battle is just as hard and nasty as it was in the First World War.
Okay, and logistics are still as important, even though war is changing with hybrid warfare.
No,
It'll still be logistics.
It's just as because the fighting element is still the fighting element. So the logistics is going on just the same. I think the third bit, which is, you know, going back to your hybrid warfare part, which is that people are now spending much more time and energy and effort in trying to undermine the cohesion and structures of countries and organizations. And they're doing that in every way possible. And a lot of people either don't understand this, or if they do understand it, they don't care. So you've still got companies working into Russia like Pepsi Cola, which, you know, I don't mind naming them. Pepsi Cola, you're rubbish. You should not be doing this. You know, when you've got companies that are flagrantly breaching ethics, when you've got countries that are flagrantly breaching ethics, then it means that, you know, in a way, Russia is winning. And that's a problem for the next war as well, because this is not going to stop, because more and more people are understanding, you know, Hamas, for example, are just understanding how to use this public and initiatives to actually to get people to support you. And if terrorist groups are going to do this, then it means that we are moving into a much more complex world in terms of war than we were before. And are the lessons being learned? No, of course they're not. Of course they're not, because we're democracies. We're behind. We still think skiing at the weekend is the main thing and is the most important. We are not taking this war seriously, nor are we. Maybe America is in the background, because if anybody's going to take the next war seriously, it will be America. But the rest of Europe and people are not taking this war seriously at all. Narrow it down. Estonia, yes, of course they are, because they're next to the bear. Finland, yes, because they're next to the bear and they've already suffered it once. Latvia, 50%. Lithuania, 75, 80%. But Poland, 100% at the moment. But lots of other countries are not. As I said, go south. They're not taking it seriously at all.
Or they're taking advantage of the situation.
Or they're taking advantage of the situation. But that's ethically not a good thing.
Glenn, you had military precision when you started. I know you want to head out. I hope the snow is stopped. I want you to do a good run. I could sit and talk to you forever. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.